This stone lectern which you're seeing is one from which biblical lections were read in churches in Syria in the 6th century, and today it stands outside the National Museum in Damascus in Syria. On it is an inscription in Syriac which says, "May there be a good memorial for the priest Abraham and for John and for his mother, who perished." We're not told how they perished. Perhaps it was in an enemy raid on their village, or maybe in the plague which struck the Middle East in the 6th century. Anyhow, I would like to take as my starting point 3 topics raised by this object, the stone lectern. First of all, the language, Syriac. Secondly, the place, Syria. And third, the words, who have perished. So first, the language. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic, a language related to Hebrew and Arabic. Aramaic in different dialects had been the main language of the Middle East until it was replaced by Arabic. Importantly, Aramaic will also have been the everyday language of Jesus in the 1st century Palestine, and it will have been spoken by his disciples and his earliest followers. Since, however, Greek was the language of government and was very widely spoken in towns, it was in Greek that the records of Jesus were first written down in the 4 Gospels that we have today. But while Christianity spread westwards in Greek and then also in Latin, it spread eastwards in Aramaic, using Syriac as its literary language. By the 4th century, Syriac Christianity was already well established in the Persian Empire, that's modern Iraq and Iran, beyond the eastern borders of the Roman Empire. It also spread at an early date to India, where, according to an early tradition, St. Thomas himself had preached, and several churches of Syriac tradition continue to flourish today in the South Indian state of Kerala. By the early 7th century, Syriac Christianity had even reached western China, travelling across Asia along the so-called Silk Route. Its arrival in China is commemorated in a Chinese Syriac monumental inscription dated 781, and Syriac Christianity was to remain a presence in China until the 14th century, when a xenophobic dynasty came to power and threw foreign religions out. Turning to the second point of departure, place, Syria, we need to go back to the 5th and 6th centuries, the date of our stone lectern. The split in Western Christianity between Roman Catholic and Reformation churches in the 16th century, and that between the Latin Catholic West and the Greek Orthodox East that developed in the early Middle Ages, are well known. Long before this, however, in the course of the 5th and 6th centuries, a major 3-way split had taken place in Eastern Christianity in the Roman Empire, a split which has largely been forgotten today by Western Christianity. This fragmentation was the outcome of 2 church councils, which proved highly controversial at the time, that of Ephesus in 431 and of Chalcedon in 451. At stake was the search for a doctrinal formula that would satisfactorily describe the relationship between the divinity and humanity in the incarnate Christ. The Council of Chalcedon came up with a formula of faith which gave rise to a great deal of controversy at this period, but eventually in the 6th century its formula was imposed by the emperors, and Justinian in particular, as the official church's doctrine. Chalcedon's formula of faith, however, was just one of several possible formulas of faith, all of which, if rightly understood, were, and indeed are, perfectly acceptable and orthodox. Prominent amongst those who disagreed with the Council of Chalcedon's formula were many people, especially in Syria and Egypt, and in due course separate hierarchies developed, not recognized by the Roman state. The continuation of these independent hierarchies are represented today, on the one hand, by the Syrian Orthodox Church, along with the Armenian, Coptic, Ethiopian, and Eritrean Orthodox churches, collectively known as the Oriental Orthodox churches. That's in distinction from the Eastern Orthodox, the Greek and Russian. And then, on the other hand, there is the Church of the East, today represented by the Assyrian Church of the East and the Ancient Church of the East. This brings me to my third point of departure from the stone lectern, namely the final words of the Syriac inscription, a commemoration of 3 persons who had perished. All too many people in the West today are under the false impression that the Middle East is entirely populated by Muslims, and the memory of the indigenous Syriac and other churches there has, like the 3 persons in our inscription, completely perished. One might well ask, why has the existence of the Syriac churches largely disappeared from the collective memory of the Western churches? The answer lies in the fact that the Arab conquest of the early 7th century effectively cut off the churches in Syria and Egypt, most of which disliked the Council of Chalcedon, cut them off from the late Roman Empire, where, by the time of the Arab conquest, the doctrinal formula of Chalcedon was the only one that was officially recognized. Thus, from the 7th century onwards, the non-Chalcedonian Christian churches living under Islam, as it were, perished from the general consciousness of the Greek East and the Latin West. Although sporadic contact with the Syriac churches was made during the Crusades, and much later through Western missionaries in the Middle East, it was not until our own times that the situation has begun to change, owing to 2 traumatic events for the Syriac churches that have taken place during the last 100 years. Firstly, the large-scale massacres in eastern Turkey during the First World War, not only of Armenians, but also of Syriac Christians, though these are usually once again forgotten. And then secondly, the massive waves of emigration from the Middle East that have taken place, beginning with those who escaped from the massacres of 1915 onwards, and most recently with the huge flight of Christians from Iraq, one of the disastrous consequences of the American-British invasion of Iraq in 2003. As a result of all this, very large numbers of Middle Eastern Christians belonging to the Syriac and other churches are now present in Western Europe, the Americas, and Australia. And today all the Syriac churches are represented in London, and very recently a new Syrian Orthodox cathedral has been consecrated in East Acton. Syriac Christianity has thus become a new presence in the heart of Western Christianity, and this gives Western Christians the opportunity to reconnect with this forgotten tradition of Christianity, the memory of which had perished and has been effectively lost for some 14 centuries. Thus, Christianity should properly be seen as consisting not just of the Latin West and the Greek East, but also of a third tradition, which one can term the Syriac Orient. Each tradition has something of its own to contribute to the others, and here I would like to end with indicating 3 specific areas where the tradition of the Syriac churches has an important feature from which the other 2 traditions can also profit. First, according to our Western expectations, theology is a discipline properly conducted in prose. By contrast, however, one of the most profound theologians of the Syriac tradition expressed his theological vision in poetry, namely St. Ephrem, who died in 373, who is widely considered as one of the finest poets of early Christianity, as well as being a wonderful theologian. And then secondly, in Syriac liturgical texts and literature, Christ is very frequently described as the good doctor or physician, and it is primarily medical rather than legal imagery that is used in the context of dealing with human sinfulness. And then third, the Syriac churches, being indigenous churches of Western Asia, provide a non-European form of Christianity that is potentially much more conducive to African and Asian ways of thinking than our Western forms of Christianity. And this is something of particular relevance in one of the main growth areas of Christianity today, in Southeast Asia and China. In ending, let me suggest to you an image of the present state of Christianity as a flat surface of a table. Now, if this table has only two historical legs, the Greek East and the Latin West, it is never going to be stable. And in order to acquire stability, it requires this third leg, namely the Syriac Orient.